With double bridles and spurs now being optional in some dressage competitions, it's bringing up some questions from people about why these tools are allowed at all and why they would be compulsory. So in this episode, I'll explain the use of double bridles and spurs. So here we go, episode 205, double bridles and spurs. Hi, I'm Karen Rohlf, and welcome to Horse Training in Harmony. This podcast is about you making progress with your horse in a way that you both can love. It's about learning how to move and be in harmony. Because yes, you really can develop a horse to be both athletic and happy. When we show up as our best selves for our horses will show up for us. So let's get started. It's really great to see some of the rules changing, just to see that there's some flexibility and that people are talking about stuff and looking at stuff and changing stuff. I think it's always good to take fresh looks at things and see what can be improved. And so some of those improvements are around use of equipment, and in different competitions, in different countries and at different levels, now spurs are optional and double bridles are optional. So this is kind of a new thing to have this option at the higher levels, at FEI levels. And different, like I said, different countries are different, and these rules are going to keep changing. So somebody might be listening to this podcast years from now and things will be different. So I'm here to not so much go into the nitty-gritty details of the rules, but more just answer some questions that are coming up. Because a lot of times when the articles come out talking about the rule changes, there's somebody who asks, well, why would they be mandatory in the first place? Because for many, many years at the upper levels, you had to wear spurs and you had to ride in a double bridle. And so a lot of people can think that's confusing. Like, why do you have to? So it's actually a really interesting topic. So in the best interpretation of why someone might have made these things mandatory, that everybody had to wear spurs and everybody had to be in a double bridle, would to think of it like a test of refined mastery, right? So a test of if you have this highly sensitive, trained horse and you have spurs on, then you have to have a really good leg or the spurs are going to be disrupting things, right? Because spurs are strong. And so if you have a highly sensitive horse, athletic horse, that touching them sort of sloppily or aggressively with spurs should cause some negative reaction. So if you can wear spurs and have such refined control of your leg that it doesn't cause any negative reaction, then that is actually a highly trained rider. And so in some schools, like, you had to earn your spurs. You had to prove to whoever the master was that your leg, you had control of your leg, you had balance enough that you weren't going to be gripping with your lower leg, and that you had very conscious control over your leg. And then you would have the honor and privilege of putting a spur on this horse to make the communication even that much more refined, and to show, that you could do it. And, that makes sense. There's a logic to that. I've seen people like start a horse wearing like big old rowel spurs, and I'm thinking, oh my God, like, that's the last thing I would want to do, is like have an oopsie. I just touched this unstarted, 3-year-old or something, with a big Rohlf spur. So I'm like, wow, that you got to have some confidence that you can control your leg even on first rides on a horse and have things not go south really quickly. So I think if you think of it like an honor and something that you earn to wear a spur, and then in the highest level of competition, it should be only people who are so good that they have the leg control to wear the spurs. So that's one way of looking at it. And the same could be said for the double bridle. Like, think of all the resistances and mouth issues and things that can go wrong with one bit. And then you got 2 bits in there. And so again, if you think of having this highly sensitive, light horse, and your hands are so good that you can have 2 bits in the horse's mouth and still have no negative things coming up from your horse. Your horse is like, I'm cool with this. My mouth can be softly closed and my tongue mobile, and I can breathe and I can swallow even with these 2 bits, because my rider's hands are so good that it's totally cool with me. So you can see, like, there's a logic to that. And of course, at the highest levels, it should be only those kind of refined riders. And so that's sort of the test. Can you, of the pool of riders who are so good with their hands and their legs that they can wear, put double bridles in their horse's mouth and wear spurs, and the horse will show no signs of anything negative from it. Like, that's the pool of riders who should be competing at these highest levels. Hopefully by the time you get there, like, that's part of the skill set that you've developed on your way there. And so you could see it as kind of a criteria. Like, you got to be able to ride with these tools in order to meet the criteria of being good enough to be able to ride at the levels. So I can sort of see that logic. Now, there's another logic, and maybe I should go review my history, because maybe some of you even have the answer. That there's a militaristic flavor to dressage, because it was very militaristic. And, in the military, it's like, that's your uniform. That's what you wear. Why? Because we said so. And you're going to have a lot more control, and you're going to be able to get a horse to go from point A to point B and move over and move their butt and do these things. And you're going to have a much better chance of getting it done, because in the army and the cavalry, you've got to hold your position. Like, you got to be there. It's like a drill team, right? So there also could be a more militaristic reason for, like, that's just what you wear, and because that's what you wear. Why? Because that's what you wear. Well, why? Because that's what you wear. Right. So those are 2 different ways that perhaps we got to a point where in dressage competitions in modern times, you had to wear double bridle and you had to wear spurs. So in general, in my way of riding, I see bits and spurs as tools of refinement. And so a tool of refinement to me is a tool that will take something that's already working and help it work in a more refined way. So when I start horses, they go without spurs and they go without bits. And when I feel like my horse is moving freely forward and is responsive without me needing a spur, then perhaps I could put a spur on to feel like I can keep my leg quieter, even more quiet, and I can maybe get a little more touch control or a little more precision around the results I get from the leg aid. So what happens if you treat the spurs like that? Like, I don't use a spur until you feel like you don't need a spur. And then you end up not wearing them a lot because you don't need them. But I still occasionally will put a spur on because I feel like you can have a little bit different conversation. So maybe it's a little bit of, you can touch them in a way that creates their abdominals to contract a little bit, and you just get a little more of that up through the back kind of feeling. Or maybe in lateral work, you can just be a little bit more precise, or maybe in flying changes or something, just a little more touch control. And maybe, it'll allow me to keep my leg down, not have to move it so far, so it's really ought to be, a conversation that's more refined if you're putting the spurs on. And in general, I will tend to use no spurs, or a spur that's like not the little nubby things, not just the ones that seem nice because they're just teeny tiny, but often the teeny tiny ones you can't feel as much when it's on and when it's off. So if I do put a spur on, I'll tend to have one that has a little bit of a length of the shaft and has something movable on the end. I don't use spiky rowels. I don't even use like disc kind of rowels. I have ones that have a little ball on the end and the ball rolls. But because it moves a little bit, and sometimes they'll even make a little noise, I can hear and feel when the spur is touching my horse much more easily than if I do some of the little itty bitty, quote unquote, nice ones. And I've seen that with other riders. So they just laying their spurs in and they don't even realize when it's not touching them. And so the same philosophy with bits. I start all my horses without a bit when I feel like, hey, I can go around as comfortable transportation. I can have them in the posture I want. I can do kind of anything I want in dressage. Then I might go, hey, that's working. Let's see if they accept a bit, number one. And if they accept the bit, then let's see if that becomes a tool of communication. And yeah, if they're really good in the snaffle, I can logically see that okay, well, why don't we do the double bridle? And it should be even more refined. Now, even though I can follow that logic, in my experience now, I've tried a double bridle in a couple of my horses and they just kind of go blech. It's just, one bit. Okay, mom, I can find one bit that's comfortable, but that's just so much in their mouth. And my horses, you'd have to have a horse with a big mouth. Natia can fit 2 bits in there, but I put it in, then I'm just curious. I took it right out. I just don't see how I can get that comfortable enough just sitting there. But I do ride several of my horses in the curb bit part of the double bridle. I just don't need the snaffle part. So why double bridle? Some of you might be asking, why even 2 bits? What the heck? The theory is that there's different actions from the snaffle versus the curb. So the snaffle, is a little bit more about, that can have the steadier contact because it's more comfortable. The horse can reach into it. It acts on the corners of the lips and you can do more lateral positioning, slight flexion. And it's that kind of conversation. And then the curb has a little bit of a leverage and can have a little bit of a lifting or bringing in of the nose, depending on the horse. But the curb also has a potential to, for horses who have a tendency to curl up, it can just feed into that. But so the 2 actions, okay, you can split that action and get really refined. You can touch the curb with your pinky and get 1 action, and then touch the snaffle with your little other fingers and get a little different action. And okay, there's a logic to that. However, in my experience, the way I ride, by the time they're there, I'm barely needing, like, their posture is so good. I'm using the neck rope kind of as the snaffle. And if I need a little bit of like a standing up in the bridle kind of feeling and the curb is there, some horses just kind of do that. They have a different feeling in the curb and it feels really positive. I'll just use that, or I do my bitless as the snaffle and the lateral conversation. And then the curb is there. So I have like a half a double bridle where it's a bitless bridle and then I hang the curb. And that's sort of, for my fancy days, right? So the home base is bitless. And then on fancy days, I may or may not add the curb there, but never a double bridle anymore. I haven't found that to do anything positive. I see the looks on their faces and they're like, really, Mom? I'll accept a snaffle. I'll accept a curb. But both? What the heck? Anyway. Okay, so that's all the theory. So conceptually, we understand the idea. The trouble is that although some riders and horses have worked this out and they have a beautiful quiet leg that just sits there and they touch and communicate in a refined way with their spurs, and the horse accepts and is comfortable in a double bridle and is so light and in self-carriage, there's almost no pressure on it, and it can be used for a very refined communication that, again, the horse accepts and is comfortable with. There are riders out there that can do that, absolutely. What we see in competition is a small window of what people do with their horses, but there's a lot of times that we see riders overusing spurs and overusing a double bridle, where the expression on the horse's face, what they're doing in their mouth, the need for the tight nose bands, all the contortions around foam and marshmallow fluff and all the other garbage that happens in there to contort what's going on in the mouth to try to make it look like your horse is okay with stuff, is kind of showing that there's, Houston, we have a problem here. Too often, the double bridles are being used to over control things with too much pressure, with not enough self-carriage, and it's just in this cycle of brace, right? And we know that problems in the mouth will circulate through the whole body. So any kind of problem in the mouth is going to affect their necks, their shoulders, their jaw, their tongue, their hyoid, into the, systems of muscles, their whole body. And so there's often the cycle of imbalance and tension, and then needing more leg, and then now there's more spur, and then back into more hand, and it just ends up this huge contortion. So I do see a lot of misuse of those tools. And so in making them optional in dressage competition is like, okay, there is a possibility. So there's now a possibility open to not use them. Great. Except I think the people who are going to take advantage of that option and who that option is going to help, or voluntarily not use them, is a really small population. So I could see, someone who has a really sensitive horse with that doesn't like the feeling of bits on its tongue, and it goes much better in a snaffle than a double, and that person is probably hugely relieved that they can now compete in just the snaffle. So I think there's probably a lot of horses out there. There's probably a lot of other horses who would fall into that description, but the rider doesn't realize it because how they feel due to their dislike of the double bridle is heavier. Because often when horses are protecting their sensitive mouth, they protect it by bracing and locking their jaw and clenching their jaw, I should say, and bracing their shoulders and necks, which ends up putting more pressure in the reins, which makes the rider feel like they need that more. And then you're in this horrible cycle of brace and pressure and brace and pressure, and neither one feels like they can let go. So I don't think that person is going to go, yay, let's put a snaffle on, right? Because the habits that are formed with that kind of riding, often if you do take the double bridle off and the horse has this habit of how they're using their necks and shoulders and jaws and bodies, when they get in the snaffle, they don't go, oh, yay, now I'm better. The cycle continues because that's how the rider rides. And then the pressure in the snaffle is going to just keep that same cycle going. So I get it. It can feel really counterintuitive, and it can be hard to break that cycle without changing something more than just the equipment. And so the same thing with the legs. If you start overusing your spurs, that once sensitive horse, that you're supposed to prove that you had this refined leg control, is now desensitized, and now it feels like they need spurs. And you think, I can't possibly not wear spurs because my horse doesn't go with the spurs. And so when you take them off, yeah, they go less. So then it kind of feels like you're in this like cycle where the horse keeps proving that you need to wear spurs. And so it's all in this environment of competition where the goal of competition is to like get things to happen. Even if they don't feel like they're happening, you still got to make it happen because there you are. This is your turn. It's got to happen now. And so we're in the cycle. So, and I have seen videos of people who were bold enough to not wear spurs, and then they were hugely criticized for having a leg that's moving around. And so I really, I admire this person for making the statement and putting herself out there and go, look, I'm not going to wear spurs. And then more people ripped apart her leg that was maybe not as refined looking, but she wasn't wearing spurs. But then where are those same people, I don't think were ripping apart the riders who had maybe a quieter leg, but the horse had, spur marks and raw spots and needed the little patchy protective things and all this stuff. So it's really, really interesting. I mean, I've seen this in general. If you go bridleless, somehow people are more particular about the level of engagement and roundness than if the horse is in a double bridle, braced everywhere. And people, the same people who, anyway, you guys know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so it's hard. A competition needs to judge what the horse is doing. And, maybe a rider who dares to take the spurs off is not going to have as sensitized and fiery and whatever reactions as a horse where their spurs are being ridden or spurs are being worn. So I don't know. I think for every example we can think of in our heads, there's going to be a certain combination of horse and rider who does the opposite of that. So it's really hard to say one way or another whether wearing spurs is good or bad, or a double bridle is good or bad, because it always depends on the actual horse and rider combination and the dynamic that's going on. I'll use this moment to repeat again my feeling about nosebands, because if you take nosebands off, you will see much more about what's going on in the contact, and contact seems to be very important to dressage judges because that's the reason they give for needing bits in the first place. Oh, we can't go bitless because dressage is all about the contact. Yet they put nosebands mandatory and allow them to be tight so you can't actually see the contact. So anyway, so it's a little crack, a little possibility for the conscientious riders who are listening to their horses and have noticed that their horses appreciate being able to go in the snaffle instead of the double, and for riders who are disciplined or I don't know what the word is, to be able to ride their horse in a competition without spurs, and give themselves that challenge. I wonder if I can do it without spurs. And for the horse that's like tickly or weird with spurs, then that person is happy because now they don't have to wear them. So it's definitely good. Having options, I think, is good, and let the scoring of the performance work out everything else. Which brings me to the point that, when we think about what's going to actually change dressage and get better riding and better results and better comfort levels for the horse, it has to come down to what is rewarded. It has to come down to the judges. Even if the noseband is so tight the horse can't open their mouth, you can still see. You can still see the tension. You can still see the tongue in there. You can still see the contact on the reins and the effect on the posture. And you can see how much the rider's needing to use their leg. You can see the dynamic of energy. And at some point, the judging just is going to have to change a little. I was going to say a little bit, a lot. I'm wondering, I always wonder about, solutions, like how could it change? And, I think about it every now and then I just go, ugh, I'm so glad I'm not in the competition world, and I just go back to my little bubble. But I'm wondering, thinking of figure skating and how figure skating used to have the compulsory figures, the actual figure skatings. And I don't know, I think different countries have it or don't have it, but the US stopped it at some point, and then I think it came back in some other competitions. But there was this whole separate event where they had to literally skate these very precise patterns. And I think even sometimes they did like blind judging, where they would skate the pattern and the judges would come in and look at the ice and judge the pattern on the ice without knowing who just skated it. So eliminating the bias and the politics of it. So I was kind of wondering, like, gosh, wouldn't that be kind of cool to have something like that in dressage where even at the highest levels, there was some sort of compulsory thing where you had to ride your horse in the snaffle with no noseband and no spurs and no stick, and you had to do some basic but challenging pattern, whether it was a series of transitions or a degree of time, a length of time on a loose rein, but your horse still in posture, and then just some stretching. Like, I think there could be some key compulsory things, and at the same time, like, being judged on your equitation, on your position. I'm sure you think of the lower levels, there's probably a bit more of that sort of thing. There's equitation classes and, dressage equitation and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, but then you're Grand Prix and you can kind of, do whatever you want. So in figure skating, when they eliminated the compulsory patterns, it sort of favored more of the, freestyle athletic skaters. And I only know like 2 drops about the figure skating, and I looked it up on Wikipedia right before this to make sure I wasn't totally blowing smoke here. But anyway, I know it changed the sport and favored different kinds of skaters when the compulsory wasn't there anymore. So they just were, I think, moved towards more of the athletic and dramatic and crowd pleasing stuff. And I'm just curious if something else was lost. I mean, the thing is, it's not better or worse. It's just different. But I wonder if something like that could really help the dressage world. And I'm sure most of the riders would think this is way beneath them. But how cool would it be? It's like if you had to do, maybe even bitless that would be cool. Like, to just show that you could ride your horse bitless, without spurs, without a stick, some very basic patterns judged to a high degree. Oh yeah, and you could also highlight relaxation. Like, so build that in. So maybe the first thing at the competition you did was something that really involved relaxation. I mean, geez, maybe you have to dismount at the end and like see if your horse will follow you back out of the arena. I don't know. I'm just thinking as I'm talking. But I think that would be kind of cool. Anyway, bottom line, spurs and double bridles are tools of refinement, and they should take communication that's already working well and help it be even lighter and more delicate. They were made compulsory because it was considered a skill to ride a sensitive horse with those tools, with no objection or resistance from the horse. These days, they're often used as a crutch and a means of control, and we've kind of become insensitive to the expressions of brace that the horses are showing us. Making them optional will give some flexibility to riders with horses that are happier without them, but riding won't necessarily improve without a little more incentive to change, and that comes from the judging.